My name is Carlo Ditta. That's the correct Sicilian pronunciation. But if you're from Gretna, Louisiana, the West Bank, which is sort of like the Brooklyn of New Orleans, they would call Carlo Ditta. That would be how you would say it over there, Carlo Ditta. I was born in 1955 in Honolulu, Hawaii, because my dad was a Marine and he had volunteered to serve in the Korean conflict. As he was traveling over, though, the conflict ended, so he was pretty much in the policing of it, and eventually got transferred back to Honolulu, where he was an MP and played on the Marine football team. And so I was born December 11th, 1955. I was consummated in San Jose, Saratoga area because my relatives, my mother's family, although she is from New Orleans, her grandparents had moved from New Orleans to Saratoga and had a lemon orchard, and so they met there before he left to go to Korea, and when he was on leave from, I think, Camp Pendleton, before he went overseas in his training, and I guess they did it there in Saratoga. And then so I really wasn't consummated or born in New Orleans, but I came back 6 weeks later because that's when I moved from Hawaii at 6 weeks old, as my dad got discharged. And I was like the baby Jesus coming home to the West Bank, the firstborn grandson of a very Sicilian family that owned a ready-mix concrete company named after my grandfather, which is my namesake, Carlo Ditta. So my dad really wanted to play football professionally and go out, try out for the Los Angeles Rams, but his father was sick and he was the oldest male, so he had to come home and help his father in the business. And in fact, he wanted my grandfather to move out there with the concrete plant, but it wasn't, he didn't go for it. So he came home and in 1955 with his newborn baby and lived next door to my grandparents' house in Harvey, Louisiana, where I grew up, going to grammar school at Junior University in New Orleans from 1st to 3rd grade, then transferred uptown to École Classique, and which was one of these new private schools, which was kind of artsy, I guess, in a way, because Mr. Federico and Mr. Hurt were the principals, and Mr. Hurt was Al Hurt's brother, and Mr. Federico's brother played guitar for Louis Prima. I didn't know this stuff till later, and in my class was Al Hurt's son, Stephen Hurt, and so music was always sort of a source of around you in New Orleans. Now, coming from the West Bank and going to school uptown, that was like a little bit of a culture shock. It's like uptown is has more of a social status than the West Bank. It's much more of a working class, and being Italians on the rise, they wanted to send their kids to more, and of course, segregation, you know? I mean, integration was happening at this time in the mid-'60s, so more of the prominent white parents sent their kids to private schools, hence they would have to, and this is what happened around that time. So after 7th grade, I was probably an ADHD student. Like, I shake my leg a lot. Now, I've noticed this in my daughter now, and then they've kind of dealt with this. But back then, they sent me to a boarding school where my dad went in Covington, St. Paul's boarding school, to learn to study better, and because I wasn't the greatest student. I had a couple of D's on my report card, and so I got sent there. But when I went to St. Paul's, it was where every troubled kid from the 60s had been sent from all over New Orleans. So there were all these guitar players and kind of rebellious youth at St. Paul's, which was a great place. It was like going away to college in 8th grade. 8th grade was rough, actually. It was in a dormitory. But 9th grade, if you made it past 8th grade, 9th grade, you had your own room. You could, you had a lot of freedoms that maybe it was in Covington, which was that's where I live now. I live in Covington because, and I've lived in California, Nashville, and New York City. But when I was in Santa Cruz, actually, I was in the earthquake in Santa Cruz. I always remembered Covington being similar to Santa Cruz, so but a lot cheaper. So when I moved back after a couple of years, I moved back to where it all began for me, which there was a lot of music at St. Paul's because they just started the high school band. So I deterred from my father's wishes to be a football player. He was very much into the Newt Rockne, George Gipp, Four Horsemen, Notre Dame, Italian, Irish thing. And, well, of course, he wanted to be that. It was sort of like a little narcissistic thing, have your kids. So it was pretty rough when I quit the football team in 8th grade to play the flute in the band. Eventually, though, I moved to the cymbals. And I was a guitar player by that time already. And so when I took up the cymbals, I remember we would go to the Mardi Gras parades in New Orleans, and to impress the girls, I would twirl the cymbals like in the Southern University used to do this. Some sort of way I knew about this. So our band director was the ex-band director of Southern. So as soon as he saw me twirl the cymbals, he said, "Ditta, you're the drum major next year." So that was my first sign of showmanship. Eventually, though, I got booted from, because I really wasn't a reader of music, but I could count the band off. We knew a bunch of songs, but you had to watch the football game the whole time, and whenever there was an interception or something went wrong, you were supposed to stop everything you were doing and hit the fight song. Well, we were all freaky people in the band, so we didn't really like football too much. So we never kind of watched the game, and we'd be playing these songs like The Horse and Inagata Davida and Signed, Sealed, Delivered. We had a nice little repertoire of songs. And the girls and the Golden Girls were there. We'd be dancing with them. So eventually after that, and we had a terrible team, so they needed a lot of fight songs. So I lasted my junior year as the drum major. Senior year, I was canned, but so I had to take up the violin, which was my sister had. They wouldn't allow me to play the guitar, and I played the violin every weekend. A couple of weekends, I was so bad, they just let me go home. So it was squeaking. But I took up music. Am I getting away from the question? Do you want me to go back to music? I would have to say the guitar thing hit me when the Beatles were on TV. It was like the Kennedy assassination, and then all of a sudden the Beatles. This was like within 2 or 3 months, I remember. It was all black and white. And things were so black and white in the black and white era, it was like before color. So I don't know when color really hit, and probably hit then, but I just remember seeing things were either in black and white or color, right? When the Beatles came out, it was just a phenomenon. Those guitars and the screaming and stuff, it just hit me at the right, I guess if I was born in 55, the Beatles came out in 64, right? So I was like 9. And then eventually all that evolved, that whole British invasion, right at that time when you're getting to be adolescent and stuff. So I definitely needed a guitar at that point, some sort of way, figure out how to, everybody had them. They were popping up everywhere. You went to Schwegman's, they had guitars for sale. They were everywhere for sale. They were in Woolco guitars. They were selling cheap ones. So as little kids coming up, a couple of things we wanted: Beatle boots and guitars, and some clothes, like Madras pants and things like these were like big things. So this was, and then there was the big division of the working class, the frat greaser thing, like if you liked the Beatles, and I lived on the West Bank, so this was really prevalent there. They were, the Beatle fans were richer kids, like a little more middle class, wealthier kids. But the working class kids, the grease we'd call them, or whatever, the hoods, whatever we would call them, they greased their hair back, and they just were different. This whole Beatle thing was totally not macho at all for them, you know what I mean? The Beatles, they would beat up kids with Beatle haircuts and then long hair, and all this was like not until maybe 2 or 3 years later did the working class people decide that it was cool to have long hair because it was affecting their sex life probably. If they didn't have long hair, the grease was wearing out thin, you know what I mean? By 66, 7, you know what I mean? And the older people probably kept at it a little bit. They kept, you know, the older working class, they continued to like probably square stuff up until probably 69, 70, 71, you know. Then everybody was hip in 71. Even my dad had long sideburns like Elvis. You know, it took him a while though, the 60s, to sink in, you know what I mean? I guess, I'm trying to think. We went to Europe and there's these pictures of him with these big sideburns, you know. I think he was like 60, 70 probably, 69. Once I went to New York in 1966 with a family trip with my mom and dad, my little sister. I was 11. And what's amazing thing was we all stayed at the Americana Hotel in New York City. And we took our maid with us, who was dressed in her in her Baptist white outfit, to watch us, I guess. They brought it so that they could go out. Well, they went out to this French disco entitled The Cheetah, which was really hip kind of mod place at the time. I remember they were dressed up in pink and they were kind of 60s. I don't know if they were mod looking, but they were kind of like gangster mod, sort of, my mom and dad, but they went to this place. Now, years later, I'm reading the Jimi Hendrix biography, and that's where Hendrix moved from Harlem in '66 with the cab driver that had the Curtis Knight and played there. So they probably saw Hendrix there in this R&B band, and it's the same summer that Linda Keith, who discovered Hendrix in a way, who was Keith Richards' girlfriend, who was like 18, walked into there also and saw him. And then one thing led to another, and he goes down to the Village to discover Dylan. So that's kind of interesting. I just learned that. And I'm getting to something because a couple of years later, I think 68, 69, I was 14, right? Maybe 3 years later. And my aunt worked at Holmes record department. And she would always give us Beatle records for Christmas or something. She was kind of a hip aunt. And on Canal Street, D.H. Holmes on Canal Street. So my grandmother decides to take me to see her sister there, and she buys me a Magnavox cassette tape recorder. I guess it's 68, you know. Well, the same year that Jimi Hendrix plays at City Park Stadium. So I show up in my little blue Nehru shirt at 14 in my tape recorder and the microphone, right? And I'm gonna tape the concert or whatever. Nobody cared about bootlegging then. It was, you know, they didn't check for tape recorders. So I'm backstage in City Park Stadium by the door, and I'm kind of interviewing the roadie, trying to make conversation with him. And the door opens, and out comes Hendrix, and the crowd rushes, right? And he's got, I can remember, he's got the silver Strat, and he's the vest with a little butterfly on it, and he's no shirt on. And so I have to grab Hendrix to hold on. So I'm holding on to Hendrix as the crowd attacked him, right? And then I let go, and he goes to the stage, right? You know, it was like a little, I mean, maybe 5 seconds I had my arms around Hendrix. Just to not stop from falling down, I held on to him. And so as he moved through or something, so I taped the concert. I had this tape maybe till I was a junior in high school, you know, the whole concert. It was great. It was and I lost the tape. This is like my first recording I ever made. I don't know, I had it for years, and it's the biggest bummer of my life that I lost my first recording ever. Not to mention that I touched Hendrix. You know, I know this sounds kind of strange, but anyway, that's my Hendrix story. There's another part of the Hendrix story. It's a little X-rated that an ex-girlfriend of mine told me that same year when they ended up in the hotel room at the Monteleone with him. But I don't know, it might not be it's not college material here, you know, maybe it's a little X-rated.
Actually, before you continue, I'm going to
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Your scarf ended up over your mouth.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Is
No,
it good?
What I'm going to do is I'm going to shift it.
Do I have to repeat it?
No, you're fine.
Okay.
I'm just going to shift this.
So that was like Hendrix, man. Like Hendrix was the thing. Like, man, you know why? Because where did we get our information from? Like those record clubs and shit, you know? Like you'd see what was the latest. I mean, you know, if I went to the Klein's drugstore, I could buy the key to the music at 13 or 15 was like Circus Magazine or Hit Parader Magazine, and the thing was they had all the ads for the bands, like the Who plays Sun Amps. This one plays, the Young Bloods play harmony guitars. So I was so psycho that I would write off for every catalog that any of these bands, I had tons of catalogs of instruments, Mosrites, and, you know, I would write for these catalogs, you know, and I'd get them in the mail. I would love to get, you know, I'd just write these handwritten letters to all these catalogs. It was my first real endeavor. Like I went beyond the Call of Duty to get these catalogs, and I had them, Fender catalogs, Harmony, and actually, you want to show me? I'll show you this guitar. This guitar is a Mosrite. Sure. And I became an avid. If you can get it from me. I became an avid collector of instruments. As I played guitar, my mother brought us down, me and my cousin, when I needed that guitar, right? She brought me down to Werlein's. And me and my cousin caught a bus from Gretna to Werlein's on Canal Street, and they rented some Gibson acoustics, and then eventually they bought us some custom crafts. I wish I had that guitar now. I look at it now, it's worth $400 or $500. But it was American made, but it was silver, had a pickup, and I got an amp, a little amp. I could do the Satisfaction lick, you know what I'm saying? That was like everything. So this was the beginning. Eventually, we changed our lessons to the West Bank, Bonvillians Music, and I traded my custom craft, I guess, for another little cheesy Japanese red guitar. I don't know, it was shiny, I liked it. Wish I had that one too. And I took the lessons over there. You know, every guitar I had, I wish I'd have kept, but through the years, I mean, I have 28 guitars right now, but through the years, they've come and gone, and it's been my total obsession loving guitars. Like when I used to write for those catalogs, Mosrite, who's out of business, Semi Mosley, he made a strange guitar, and he bought this company in 1964. And you can see this guitar. This is a Dobro made by the Dobro brothers, but in 64, or maybe it was 66, I think. But I think 64. Well, actually 66, I remember the back of this. This is a DeArmond pickup. I got this in Thibodeau. It was, I watched it for a while, and this was a factory DeArmond, but this was the first year Mosley bought Dobro, and there were not so many of these around. So I paid recently $417 for this, but I've seen it for sale for $3,000, you know? And it's a really cool, you can hear it, yeah. Very folky, and I've been reading a lot about them. Anyway, all these guitars I'm crazy for. I fueled a lot of it, you know, because, you know, when I was a kid, an old guitar, to find an old one, they were cheap, $80, $100. There was a pawn shop in Harvey where I took that shiny red one and I traded it for an old Fender. God, I wish I had that guitar. My dad made me take the Fender back to the guitar because it was all beat up, and the guy wouldn't give me my money back. It was a deal. And that Fender today, it was probably a $59, it might be worth $10,000, $15,000. But at the time, I let it go. I traded it for something else. You know, it was just. So these guitars, and eventually that evolved into record collecting. For some reason, as I started to dig the blues, I guess it really started with me trying to be a songwriter. and having access, at some point, I realized that I wasn't a musician to be in a cover band and to play and copy things perfectly. I just didn't have that talent, and that just didn't. I knew that I just wanted to create new things with the guitar, and it was limited around here for new stuff. It wasn't really, especially in white rock and stuff, the only creative part of New Orleans was in the black community. In fact, all of the white bands that were popular during the 60s came from Baton Rouge, other places that were more predominantly white. But here, all the music, when the Beatles came out, it sort of killed all of the New Orleans rhythm and blues music. Now, I didn't know about this music at the time, but fast forward to the 70s, and this beginning of the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival. They had tried to start the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival in 1966, right? Right around the time all this was going on, right? But there was segregation at the time. They hadn't straightened that out, although it was a law locally. So there was a guy by the name of Dean Andrews. In fact, he's a big, Dean Andrews is notorious for being in the JFK assassination plot. They had called him to represent Oswald. In fact, in JFK, John Candy plays Dean. But Dean was this character I grew up around because my aunt married his brother. So Dean was always at my grandfather's table. And my grandfather was this big Italian man, had the concrete business. And Dean was a lawyer, and he would come, and he was always very beatnik with dark glasses and Big Daddy this and Big Daddy that. And he was a very colorful character. And my uncle, Dick Andrews, at the time was his brother. So I kind of watched this. Now, they always thought that the Andrews were a little off a little bit because Dean had been, Dick had been locked up a couple of times for paranoid schizophrenia or something, and he was my uncle, so it was notorious that Dean was, a little supposedly crazy, and he would see my dad, and right at the same time, the Garrison investigation had started. And Dean would see my dad on Bourbon Street, and of course my dad thought his brother was crazy. So he would say things like, "They're gonna make a movie about me. Wait and see, Buddy Hackett is gonna play me." My dad said, "He's fucking crazy, excuse my language." He's out of his mind. Well, sure enough, my dad died and JFK comes out. I'm going, "Dad, you see, anyway." So Dean, although he was a notorious immigration lawyer and tried to get Carlos Marcella back in the country, he was on all this Italian entanglement of wise guyism is everywhere around New Orleans. It's in jukeboxes, it's in the communities, it's in the record business. All those Italians that had those record companies were notoriously hooked up in one way or another, on some kind of level of how all this street stuff worked, because all the bars and jukeboxes were owned by the Jefferson Amusement, which were the Marcello family and they would finance the bars. All the bands would play for their, and that was the nature of the New Orleans rhythm and blues scene. A lot of them guys were notorious gamblers, that owned these record companies. And if you go to New York, you'll see the same thing. Like Morris Levy ended up owning all these labels in New York. He was hooked to the Genovese. He was the Jew. He's a guy that's portrayed in The Sopranos as Hash or whatever. Well, that was a real guy in Morris Levy Roulette Records, and all of his friends would be gamblers, and they'd lose their labels to him, and it was kind of like a gangster business a little bit, And of course, most of the hits were these black fellas, and they would buy them Cadillacs if you saw, and stuff like that. And so it got a notorious rep. Then all of a sudden the Beatles came out, right? And then all of a sudden white kids wanted to do that and then all of a sudden white kids could sell a lot more records than black fellas with the same kind of music, not even as good. So all that business started happening. But in New Orleans, they never did have any white people. I mean, Harry Connick Jr., what year did that come out? That's about the first one. Well, Dr. John was never a megastar, but many years. Then you had Al Hirt and Pete Fountain. But it was the white version of the black jazz, pretty much. Not that the Italians didn't have a lot to do with jazz here. They did. And Pete Fountain was an Italian heritage, and I don't know, Al was too, I think, half or something. Maybe he was a German or Irish Al, I'm not sure. But, and Armstrong, of course, was around, you know, but as far as these new young white rock kids, you had John Fred and the Playboy Band from Baton Rouge. They made a hit record in the 60s, but I really can't tell you too many of them that had hits from here. Johnny Rivers from Baton Rouge. Johnny Rivers was Johnny Ramostella. He was from Baton Rouge. He was a big star, pretty much, Johnny Rivers. Still, you know. So this thing happens in New Orleans where the New Orleans R&B scene sort of dies, right? And Cosmo Matassa is the Italian that recorded all this stuff. These labels would come to town and they'd go to Cosmo and Cosmo would record it. But, you know, he had that sound he was getting, and then he had Dave Bartholomew's band, which was Fats Domino's band. They had Lloyd Land, different ensembles which would change. And eventually some white artists would use that too. I think John Fred's early record he made in New Orleans before he got the hit Shirley was, but this transition that happened kind of killed New Orleans rhythm and blues. So whatever industry that was here, the regional record business, you know, sort of died. Marshall Sehorn and Alan Toussaint took over then, and they became more of a hookup to a major label, and he was a songwriter at the time, and eventually, you know, he did Southern Nights, and that was something to watch. That all happened when I was young, and it had a big influence. All that evolution of how Alan Toussaint emerged in New Orleans as a rock star in a way, not in a national level. So watching Alan rise, he was the only guy around that I could really say, well, you know, I could look up to, you know. So around the time, most of my influence, around this time when I guess I graduated from high school, up until this time, I was really a regular white kid who played guitar, and I would be into the Allman Brothers Band and all the rock bands and the Beatles. I would be focused on that. All of a sudden, after, you know, I guess I graduated from high school and moved in the French Quarter, went to UNO. This New Orleans R&B, they rediscovered Professor Longhair. And when I say rediscovered, not for the black people, for the young white people at Tulane and stuff. My friend, and I just reissued a record. I should have brought it with me because I took the photos, and I took these photos in '76. But there was a guy that was a white, and he plays guitar with me now. His name was Billy Gregory. Billy Gregory, when I was a teenager, was in these bands that were popular in town. They would play at the bank and different, and we would know about him because he was a freaky dude. He would be like in a blues. He was from Memphis, but he lived here. Very long hair, would play like a rock southern, one of the first southern rock dudes. And he had a band called Nectar. And these bands that would play out dances, some of them would be these white bands like Nectar, and other bands like that would be covering the hippie rock music of the day. But then maybe we would get Deacon John, you understand? Deacon John was kind of special to New Orleans. Now, at the time, Deacon John, for my aunt, who was a little older than me, they would have Deacon John from another era in the Ivories. But in the 60s, Deacon John and the Electric Soul Train, okay? Now, I had seen Hendrix and all that, so I guess it was 67 or 6. I go to a concert, the first time I see Deacon John at Municipal Auditorium, a Turtles concert. Now, the Turtles were really big, man, Happy Together and all that, for a young little teeny bopper like myself, Beatle. But there, at the concert, opening for the Turtles was Deacon John and Electric Soul Train. He had all these big amps, and he played Hendrix. I hadn't seen Hendrix yet. it might be a year or two before I'd see Hendrix, but I knew about Hendrix. We knew Foxy Lady and all that. And then he did Sly and the Family Stone, sing, and Lady BJ sang. So it was a black band, though, you understand? It wasn't a white band. Now, I think that was the first one I ever saw, you know what I'm saying, at the Turtles concert. And eventually, fast forward a couple of years, and we would hire Deacon, maybe in high school later, a couple of years later, it would be back to Deacon John and Ivory's, and now he's covering Bill Withers. You can see the evolution here. So, you know, man, he would be like the only black band that played it out there. All the rest of them were band, but Deacon John. But he was noted for that all around the city, Deacon John. He's the president of the union now. He's my good friend. And we knew he made a record, Many Rivers to Cross. We didn't know Jimmy Cliff wrote it. Not until later when we saw The Harder They Come. We thought it was a Deacon John record, but they were covering Jimmy Cliff. So this history, so Billy Gregory we know about. So somewhere around 69 or 70, two important things happen in history. Hudson Marquez, who's a freaky hippie, who actually ends up was kind of helping the Nectar Band, which was the resident freaky hippie, long-haired like band. The Jefferson Airplane come to town. They play at the St. Bernard Civic, right? And Nectar opens for them, right? Well, they become friends, Nectar and Jefferson Airplane, and they invite them back to San Francisco. Of course, a few of them go and they hang out, which leads to, eventually though, another thing happens. Hudson Marquez, one of the roadies for the Nectar, is an avid blues fan, and he had heard about Professor Longhair, and he was into finding old blues guys. So after years of hunting him down on Dryad Street, because Fess was a gambler and he had cheated some people in cards, and he thought they were trying to kill him, some gangsters or something, you know? So and Hudson had long hair, and the police, if you were long hair and a black hood, they thought you were trying to score some drugs. He got beat a couple of times and slammed on the ground for being in the hood by the police then. Eventually he finds Fess, Hudson. And this is important because what it does is it brings Fess, he pays his union dues. Now, before this, Fess was in a segregated union, but now the unions aren't segregated anymore, they're integrated, right? So he pays Fess's union dues, and Fess gets to go rehearse in the integrated union because you pay a little bit and you can rehearse it, and he buys him an RMI electric piano, right? Making him upwardly mobile, and he starts getting gigs with the white hippies at the different parties and freak parties, you know, and he starts playing for white people now. And before that, not that he didn't play for white people in the 50s and 60s, he probably did a little bit, but not like this 60s thing, you see? So Hudson makes a tape and interviews him on it was Wollensack, right? And he brings it, this is important, and he brings it to the Jazz Archive where Allison Minor is working, who is Quint Davis's girlfriend, right? Now Quint knew Hudson, and he was a little younger than Hudson, but he was more into the Beatles and trying to be like a Woodstock hippie than a blues aficionado. And Hudson was a wild, bipolar, crazy guy who eventually was a roadie for the Jefferson Airplane. So he would leave and come. So around this time, George Wein, who put on Newport, and Quint Davis's dad's friend, and they introduced Quint to George and the Jazz Archive. They know about this tape, right? So George says, because Dick Allen at the archive, and then it's there, and Allison, so they say, they want to start a festival here, second time. You remember Dean tried in 66, but now we don't have segregation, we got integration, right? So George Wein's involved now, you know. Before they had that 1 year at the Jung Hotel with Dean Andrews. And back to Dean. Dean was a clarinet player, right? So Dean brought Danny and Blue Lou Barker back in 66 for that festival, and they moved back to the city, which is another memorable thing. You know, Danny Barker, who passed away, I made a couple of records on them, but Danny was a great guitarist, played on 1,000 recordings with Billie Holiday, even Dexter Gordon and Charlie Parker. He was the chord guy, you know? And Blue Lou was a famous, Don't You Feel My Legs, Maria Muldaur cut that song. So they come back for that, but they end up staying here, okay? And then they start the Fairview Baptist Church Baptist Band, which Winton's in, right? Okay? So, but that festival didn't make it because of the ignorance. So now 69, 70, right? We're back in there. And so George Weins in town says, look, if we're gonna have this festival, you need a catalyst, an artist that you can plan it around, hence Fest. You gotta go get Fest. So there was a little competition then, because then they had Quint wanting Fest, right? And then you had Hudson, who was trying to bring Fest back to California because the Jefferson Airplane had a record label and also the Grateful Dead. But of course, those were crazy, drug-addicted hippies out there, and Quint was a lot more because his family had money and they were going to start. So it was a better play for Fest in a way. So hence, Quint discovers Fest along has resurgence. And Hudson's always got his feelings hurt. So in this last record, I had the liner notes right. It was Hudson found him and then Quint took him, you understand? Because I know all these people. But hence the jazz. So Billy Gregory, around this time, something else important happens. There's a pop festival at McRae. I think it's 1969 or 70. And it's a beautiful day come for it. Now, they had come for the pop festival at the Speedway before, so this was their second time. And the guitar player was a big pain in the ass, and he got arrested for pot, I don't know, some kind of way got arrested here. So they were finished with him. So they're on Bourbon Street, and who's playing on Bourbon now, after Nectar, but Billy Gregory at the Ivanhoe with the Arthur Brothers and Frank from the Radiators. So anyway. So he's playing, and it's a beautiful day going there, and they say, oh man, you want to come back to San Francisco with us and finish this record and stuff? This is a really important thing in my life. I know it sounds crazy, because at this point we all know Billy, we're all kids, we're like 10th grade, 11th grade, and the news is Billy Gregory. Now you have to understand, in 1969 or 70, all of the rock stars went to the Warehouse, and it was like the Fillmore of New Orleans. So the bands on that circuit were the ones we bought the albums of. They were on the FM radio. So It's a Beautiful Day with Whitebird was a fucking rock star band. You understand, with that album cover and everything. Billy is joining It's a Beautiful Day. You understand, the ultimate hippie San Francisco band, and they get him to infuse this up-and-coming stuff. The Allman Brothers are starting. He's going to put that stuff in it, right? So he makes an album right off. He helps him finish it. He's got a brassiere on his head. It's a Big Bad Beautiful. Oh, Lord, he's on Columbia. So this is like the only guy we know that made it to the big rock show, Billy Gregory, right? Then it's his first gig, 21 years old in New York, Carnegie Hall, and they make an album. At the same time, Live at the Fillmore East is made, which is a memorable record, Live at the Fillmore East, right? Same time, it's a live record. And we get that, of course, God, Billy's like a god. Look, he's jamming like the Allman Brothers. This is like mainstream. So they come back. They pick up another guy from New Orleans, Buddy Cockrell, who used to play at our high school dances in these cover bands. He was like a rock star. So, oh no, they got Buddy too. And they go back to San Francisco. So they come back to the Warehouse in their tuxedos and their long hair, and Patty Santos in her glitter dress. And they do, and I can remember this show, and they do Whitebird. It was like a New Orleans band. It's a Beautiful Day. Two of the people were from here. It didn't have shit to do with New Orleans. But for us, it was at the height of rock star. And this is we didn't know Poopadoo and all that shit. We didn't care about it. So all of a sudden, at 70, we in high school, so we following Billy, we buying their records, Live at Carnegie Hall. Then Buddy Cockrell's in the band, and they do another record. It's a Big Bad Beautiful. Well, that record bankrupts them, because they gave Buddy too much voice. It became too much of a Southern band, and they lost the whole vibe, and the lead guys quit. But man, the cover is beautiful. Jim Marshall shot the cover and shit, we were still impressed. I still got 3 copies of it I saved in my record collection. And Billy comes home, 1973. for, right? After a 3-year run, touring everywhere. He's got fancy cars, like hippie, redone Buicks and stuff. This is very hippie to buy these old cars. And he was friends with Bill Graham. I mean, he had all these stories, and his wife. And I started dating his wife's friend who was living there. He was a little older than me, and they were totally hip San Francisco people coming back to New Orleans, right? But when Billy comes home, I remember I bought a guitar from him, and he was such a success to us, you know what I mean, in music. He joins, because he's such a rock star, they get him to play in Professor Longhair's band. So of course, we start going to fest gigs, right, with Billy on the guitar, right? Which he plays a couple of years. It culminates in 1976, where he is the stage man at the fest, and he's playing with fest. And I'm there with my camera trying to be a photographer. I got my darkroom, and he lets me on the stage, so I'm shooting fest that year. Well, 2 months before that, he had gone to the Chicago Folk Fest and played with Fest. And because they didn't know how to mix the band, it was a short or something, he fixed the ground. The first night was no good, but it was a broadcast for WFMT. They give him a tape of the broadcast of the show, and he holds it for 30, 40 years, you know? So we start playing music again, you know, and so, you know, fast forward, I don't start the record company till I start playing music more around the time Elvis Costello comes out. Because when I was a senior, I got really crazy one night in the French Quarter. I cut the tip of my finger off. I was kind of drunk and making a sandwich, and it was like many years I could not play. So, but by the time '76 rolled around again, I was playing again. And it wasn't, I'll be honest with you, the scene wasn't happening until the punk rock thing happened again. When the Clash came here to tour, they picked up a band to open for them, and it was an old band that used to play our dances, but because they were backing Lee Dorsey. And Lee Dorsey opened for them. So all of a sudden, between the Jazz Fest, and then you had Rhapsodize, all these bands that were kind of hippie blues bands that started playing it was a resurgence of the New Orleans R&B during this time. 76, 75, all that. Eventually, that's kind of when we get back into it. And then the punk rock thing. Then the blues was different from the punk rock thing for a while. And they kind of went in two different directions. But I guess my label started around the time I was playing guitar in these sort of like freaky punk rock bands called Auto Bop. And we had this production company where we'd make jingles and for people. Me and my friend A.J. Lauria, who was one of the original founders of Orleans. He wrote some Mardi Gras song and had the Marcelluses. So he was a little older, and he was sort of a mentor to me, and we would make these jingles. And eventually he didn't want to continue on so much with the business of it, so he got out of the business. But A.J.'s still my friend, and he was very good friends with Alan Toussaint, and he made a bunch of records. And we started because there was an artist that I had this song called Pray and Play and Everything Gonna Be Okay, because I used to go to church with AJ at the cathedral, and he had made me a devout Catholic at the time. I don't go right now. I'm kind of in an agnostic period right now, I think. I'm not questioning my faith. I'm just the vision of it. I'm not sure what it is right now. So, but I wrote this song, Pray and Play and Everything's Gonna Be Okay. Sometimes you must give away things that come your way, but in time you will see what it is that pleases thee. It was like a little reggae song because I had a Casio and I had a reggae beat, and I wrote it. Well, I put it away. I wrote it really quickly, like it just hit me. Well, around this time, we had a friend who was, I'll link to the R&B and black music land, Kerry Brown. And he was a drummer. He lived in Gretna. He was my friend. And he played down at the 544, and there was a guy named Mighty Sam McLean who took a bus here. He was an old blues artist. And Kerry took him in, right? And he's at his house in Gretna. And I'm still working, selling concrete. I sold concrete till I was about 25 in the concrete business before I ran away with my guitar to New York. So at Kerry's house, of course, I was sneaking around. I don't know what we were doing. We might have been, I don't know, smoking some weed or something with Mighty Sam during the day at the house. He was sitting there in his chair. We had the guitar there. So I said, look, I got these songs. He says, he's a singer, right? He said, oh yeah, I like that song, Pray. I had never heard Mighty Sam sing in my life. I was just playing. So I had the studio time, and I knew they were singing with Carrie down on Basin Street at the Code 38, which was kind of a tough little spot, you know? So I went, I invited him to the studio. I had a makeshift little band in there, and so I played him my song. He's got his tuxedo, he's getting ready to go to the gig, right? Looking at the stuff right here. Well, he starts singing. It's like it's Bobby Blue Band, a little Milton, you know? I'm like, oh my God, this guy is like a real, and so we start digging around, we find his records and stuff from the 60s. He had been a real, authentic soul singer with some history. It had some, the reason a lot of things happened in soul music was a Mighty Sam. So I had these tapes, so immediately, it was the first artist I wanted to sign ever. I didn't know how to sign an artist, you know, so I went and I made this contract, and I don't know, and I signed. It was a terrible contract, you know. For him, for me, you know, it was just one. But I learned something from it, and we made a record. And then at that time was the time I quit the concrete business. I got some wild hair, and I'm moving to New York, and so I had a little savings, and I spent it on a production. A better production where I'd hire Deacon Johns, and you know, maybe I spent $2,000. That was a lot of money for a couple of songs, right? And my dad said, oh, you are crazy, you put your money in that stupid music business. So I moved to New York with my two songs, Pray and Why. That was the other song, Why. And my aunt calls me because she knows, this is an aunt that always supported me, lived in California and helped me out. She was kind of, and she says, man, there's this American Song Festival, why don't you enter it? It's like $5 or something, $4, enter this song, enter your song. So I entered both of them, $5 each, and I forgot about it. So I was living with this girlfriend, and we had the studio, and things were getting tough, you know what I mean? We didn't have no money. After about a year, it was nice, and romance had worn off, kind of, you know what I mean? And so we're at each other's throats. I'm about ready to give up on this music business and just chuck it in. And this happens sometimes in life, right? When you get low, and all of a sudden the phone rings, right? Is this Carlo Ditta? Yes. This is Jill Frisbee from the American Song Festival. Your song just won Best Gospel Song at the American Song Festival. Wow, I said, what did I win? He says, $2,000. And like, sometimes life speaks to you, you know what I mean? And it hits you, you know what I mean? He said, in your other song, it's got an honorable mention. I said, what did he win? $50. So I made $50 on my $2,000. And it was like God saying, oh, somebody, you know, the Spirit saying, yeah, you're doing the right thing. Okay. At this time, we applied for a grant at the Jazz Fest, gave Mighty $1,000, and used the other $1,000 to press these 45. So, and then I decided I'm moving back to New Orleans. I'm going. This is a son. I'm supposed to go back there and make some more music, right, in New Orleans. I'm tired of because blues was not happening in New York at the time. So I'll come home for the World's Fair. I carried the records first. I'm in the village. I carried the records from Flatbush, 700 records on the subway back to the village. That's very New York, you know, my 45s, right? And the record place was Roma Bar Record Pressing, and they had all these Jamaicans in there, and the guy was this Italian kind of guy. He would go, Neve, this, Neve. He was yelling at him, Neve, like Nevada, like that's like an Italian word for Negro, you know, Nevada. And he was yelling, Neve this, Neve that. I'm going, God, this guy's going to turn on his ass. But anyway, all the records were kind of weird, like about half of them were lopsided. I don't know, it was a terrible pressing. And I come home with these records for the World's Fair. And we ended up playing a couple of times with Mighty Sam at the fair. But it's pretty much a wash. And I sold like 25 or 35 records to Roberta, who exports them to Japan. Well, come to find out, Mighty Sam is a huge cult hero in Japan, right? And when they see this, oh, he's found the Mighty Sam, because they had all his old records. So they buy maybe 100 records from us, and they want to know if Mighty Sam wants to go to Japan and play with this Japanese band. Now, where am I living now? I'm in California. I decided to move to California, and I'm living out in California. And so AJ, my partner at the time, goes with Mighty Sam to Japan, and they have these concerts, and they record an album. And they record one of my songs, whatever it takes, two of my songs, 2 or 3, you know? So I licensed the record back, and I re-released it over here live in Japan in CD, not vinyl, in CD, because CDs were just coming out. Vinyl was over. And so, but not before I made Guitar Slim Jr.'s record. That was my second record. Yeah. I put that out in vinyl first. It was in 1988. And it was before CDs. He didn't know he was that was April Fool's Day, 88. I put that number. I would put these weird numbers on the records. The distributor hated that because they want like consecutive numbers. I would put like these numerology things. I don't know. Anyway, Mighty Sam and Guitar Slim Jr., these two badass blues guys. So Guitar Slim Jr., I think I moved back from California. I'm working at Tower Records. I know I have 2 records on it. I have Mighty Sam, I made the EP, Mighty Sam 12-inch, and I have Guitar Slim Jr. And of course, I'm the provincial expert upstairs at Tower, so whenever a tourist comes in and they want a record, they get Mighty Sam, and I would play it for them, and that's just what I want. So I was in a great position there. I mean, the salary sucked, but I sold a lot of records. And I learned a lot about the record business and how to distribute and stuff. So when I went back to California, I got tired of that. I had a house in the French Quarter that I rented and sold, and we moved back out there. And when we moved it back, we went to Santa Cruz instead of LA, because we liked Santa Cruz. It was kind of a hippie place. It was kind of, I like blues there, music. So I'm working there, and I had a weird feeling about that record. I entered it in the Grammys, and sure enough, it gets nominated for Grammy when I'm out working at Kinko's. I'm working at Kinko's in Santa Cruz. Gets nominated for Grammy, so we go to the Grammys. It loses to Willie Dixon, but I score a major print because I'd called People magazine in New York, and the guy was out, Steve Doherty. He was the review editor. So I called LA, they weren't too interested in it. They told me Steve would be back in a week. So I waited a week. Usually I would have maybe not called, and I said, you got a Grammy story? He says, no. I said, I got one. I got an artist, it's his first record. I'm a little label in New Orleans. He's up for a Grammy, and he don't know what a Grammy is. And he's been fucked up ever since he found out what it is. He's pawned his guitar. So they come down and they do this spread with him, with Reagan on the cover, pawning his guitar and Claiborne and everything. Well, what I did was I over-promoted myself to the point of I only had 1,000 LPs, and now I'm on every grocery store stand in the country, and like the record's demand is like, wow, totally over-promoted myself. I had more publicity than Willie Dixon. But it wasn't the greatest thing for Slim, because then he goes on more roles, and all kinds of people are looking for him, Sean Penn, Prince, everybody. It just kind of, and he always had a little alcohol problem, so it kind of made him a little crazy. But then he came back, and he survived. A lot of people haven't survived. He's here still. Both of us are still struggling and scuffling 30 years ago. And then we'll re-release it, and we're going to try and do a gig and it's a beautiful thing. But along the way, during the years, I decided to expand the catalog and make various records, and some of the artists I made records on: Danny Barker, Blue Lou Barker, Little Freddie King, Coco Robichaux. A lot of them are gone right now. Danny's gone, Coco's gone, Rolling Stone. When I was a kid, I'd go to, not a kid, I was maybe older, I would go to the Memory Lane record store and I'd buy old records, and there was Ace Records, Rolling Stone. I Was a Fool. I said, man, I gotta have that one. So I bought it and I put it on. It was so spooky. So I started asking around. Sure enough, Rolling Stone is Roland LeBlanc, and my friend Jules Badouk, he used to sing at his dances, and he's working at Hops and Galvanizing on the West Bank. He comes over and he in his workers outfit, and he plays some songs, and we decided we're gonna make a record because he was the singer in Dr. John's band. So Mac at Dr. John's, oh man, Roland. So we make this record. It's a beautiful record with Dr. John, and it didn't really make a lot of money, but I got a review in Rolling Stone magazine. So that was cool. And it led to weird things like Jerry Wexler writing this beautiful quote about me on the back of this. Well, I asked it from my catalog, you can read it. Jerry Wexler coined the phrase rhythm and blues. And in fact, that's the name of his bio, Rhythm and Blues. He was the right-hand man at Atlantic Records. He was one of the owners with Ahmet Ertegun. And Ahmet, I used to go to Ahmet's office. Ahmet was this Turkish diplomat, and he came to see Slim, and he was friends with Phil Spector and all this. But Ahmet was always a little arrogant about stuff, you know what I mean? He was kind of, I spent hours up there playing. He told me, I'll put your records out, I'll put you out of business, and this and that. He would never do anything for me, but he always would observe me, right? Wexler, who I would just call on the phone, and I would send him records, and he would listen, and he would really listen. And he said, man, that Roland, and he knew Mac, because he was the Svengali for Dr. John, but as well as Ahmet, both of them were. His daughter OD'd probably because Mac turned her on to heroin. It's in his body, you know, that's strong stuff, you know. I'm now friends with Paul Wexler, who plays keyboard, so it's kind of interesting, and we're buddies now. But I used to talk to his dad on the phone. I sent him the Rolling Stone record. He says, man, you know, that's the greatest record. That's probably one of the best records Max played on, because he was very... So I said, man, would you give me a quote from my catalog? And look what he does for me. Now that's the difference between Wexler and Ahmet. You know, he's from the street. He's from the street. He sent me this quote on a fax. Carlo Ditta, the man at Orleans Records, is a true acolyte of the Church of Second Line and a keeper of the flame of funk. Jerry Wexler, a fan. Now, I don't make a lot of money at this, actually. I'm always scuffling it. And I come from a family that is very money-focused, right? And to them, this is a stupid thing I do, make music, make art, especially if I don't make a lot of money at it. How stupid could you be? You came from a good upbringing, you know, you didn't use that to become richer. And then, you know, that's a pretty hurtful thing, you know, as far as for an artist to say, you know, because we don't really, very few of us really get monetary justification. One time I got monetary justification was when I made the Willie DeVille record. After making a Guitar Slim Jr. record, which was torturous because he's such a street dude, it's always Jump Street. I love him, I'm still dealing with him. I know how to deal with him, and I know what I can take and what I can't take. And he's gotten older and much more mellow with this. And one thing I want to say about being here is I'm a privileged white boy. Even though I'm a Sicilian American, I could bitch and moan about how the Sicilians were not liked and we weren't allowed to be in certain social clubs and things like that. I felt all that crap, as my family tried to push me up the social ladder. And every time I tried to get into the social ladder of the white world, be it the test I had to take to get into Jesuit high school instead of St. Paul's, Catholic high schools, I wasn't good enough for Jesuit. Maybe I had ADHD, who knows? Maybe, who knows? I know I test very high IQ when I was a kid, but I wasn't, after that, something in school. I mean, I never studied and I always passed, but it was just boring as shit to me, school. But what I have to say here is, even in music, anytime I would try to get in, the white man, and I'm gonna sound like, crazy here, the white man was always, wouldn't let me in a lot of ways. And that's the whole time I was in New York, beating the streets with my stuff. That was when I was in LA, everywhere. The people who gave me a break in this music business, for the most part, were black African-American Americans and or Europeans. French people, Italians, Germans. That's where my success was. Alan Toussaint. He inevitably let me produce him on a record on his songs. I can go Guitar Slim Jr. and Mighty Sam, people who had no business believing in a young white kid like me who had no experience. And maybe a lot of it was I was a rich kid and I would do something for them, but that wasn't Alan Toussaint's deal. You know what I mean? He was a guy that was all about positive and making things, you know what I mean? And there weren't a lot of people around here to influence me in that. I was pretty much rejected everywhere else, from my piano teacher when I was a kid at Loyola, who said I didn't want to study hard enough, to my Catholic brother who said I wasn't good enough to be the drum major because of some reason. Now the guy who was the drum major sells insurance, he doesn't play music anymore. And I've dedicated my life to music pretty much for not a lot of money. I mean, I've had a couple of scores in my life, but pretty much I was lucky to get a little bit of an income from a family business and totally invest it into my life. And it doesn't make sense in a weird way. In this world of the bottom line, everything's got to make sense. It just doesn't make sense. Art doesn't make sense from a bottom line point of view. In a lot of ways, it has been a battle being who I am. Not unlike, I'm not saying that the people who are black, who are coming and trying to raise from the bootstraps and make something of themselves in it, you know what I mean? And I'm empathetic for all of that stuff. And what I'm trying to get at is this music business, they've pretty much taken all the incentive away from us in this era that we're in right now, where everything has to be, I don't know, I'm saddened by the current outlook right now. And I'm not quitting music. I had a good gig, I made $140, that's like a good night. Last night, I played the day before, I made 10. So there's no security in any of this. And there's a certain amount of faith I would imagine I have in my destiny, be it in spirit or if I believe in God, Jesus, whoever, because I'm sure we're all connected in some sort of way or whatever. From me touching Jimi Hendrix to the lowliest blues guy, Guitar Slim, So over these years, the financial successes have just been few and far between. And we scuffle for dollars and tens and fives in the tip jar and count the money after the gig, and hope that we all get a little something. And we spend all our day on a record that might not sell, years trying to make a record that might not even sell. I have a record I made on Josephine Mills. I sold 300 copies and spent 2 years and $10,000 on it. I'd worked hard for. I don't know what I'm getting at, but I find that a music business saved me, how about that, from a life of emptiness. Because if I would have chosen another route and strictly just thought about money, and I'm around these people, they're my family, all right? And they're the first people that try to screw me out of my shit and call it welfare, that they will not let me be involved in because I'm an artist or whatever. Not that I'm dying to be, but if you owned, you know, and they're the first one to take 2 or 3 times more than they're supposed to. And I think it's very reflective of what's going on right now in the whole country, you know, with this guy we got president. I don't want to get too political right now, but I got to. I really got to about this, you know what I mean? Because a lot of people aren't talking about this right now. And it's serious. It really is. Us artists are scared to fucking death. I'm sorry about this shit. You know, we're like, we can't believe that this, and I have family members who think that this is good for us. And how can you argue against the stock market? You understand? Well, all the same shit is what took away all the incentive from us, like Google, YouTube. I mean, why do you think we don't get anything? Because the major record companies who own the back catalog go to Google and they get a little check up front and they agree to a shit rate, so they get a little money, and they sold us out. Now we got shit, we get shit, you know, everything's free, you know. That's why vinyl's growing, you know, okay. So, and people say, well, you signed up to be an artist, too, so that's, you know, that's what it is. You know, okay. But if you really want to talk to me ever, you can't say that to me, you know what I'm saying? You know, you really can't. I don't know what times we're in. I just know this. I'm 61 years old, and I've been doing this for 40 years. And there's nothing else I want to be doing than this. I don't want to sell insurance. One time my dad said, my first daughter was around, you're going to have to get a job. So I cut my hair, long hair, cut my hair. So you got to go. I have this friend who sells New York life insurance. Why don't you go take the insurance test? So I went there and I took the insurance test. They were weird questions. Would you lie or cheat to sell insurance and all that kind of weird shit on this test, right? Of course, I said no. I wouldn't do any of that shit, right? Because I'm thinking they wanted a guy with integrity or whatever. So I'm waiting around with my new haircut for the phone call. All of a sudden, all of a sudden I get the call. Carlo, this is Lou. It's like the song festival call. One of the epiphanies. I said, oh, fuck, I have to get a job now. He says, I got your test results. It looks like selling insurance is the furthest thing you should be doing. I said, thank you. I'm sorry I didn't work out. So I remember that vividly. And then as being a music man, I'm a pretty good publicist. I know how to bust through and get publicity. But the businesses in America right now that make music are like cottage industry business, you know? Every artist makes their own record now, even the little indie records. The artist doesn't even know why he needs me. Now, I can spend 2 hours telling an artist why he needs somebody, you know, because everybody's got this cottage mentality right now, including myself to survive, you know, I have to have it. And a lot of me lives in another era of the 50s and the 60s that I saw my grandfather when he started the business, and he used to have the money in the cigar box, and he would run things like that. But now everybody has all the tools they need at the internet and the computer that they think they can do it all themselves, include have the studio and all that stuff all in one thing, that editing the video, everything, dun, 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 dun.
So what advice would you have for someone who wants to do the production, the sound recording?
Go collect records and figure out how the records that you love, because records are still 59 cents at Goodwill. And if you're older, well, young people won't get this senior citizen discount. I get the senior citizen discount, which saves me the tax and 5%. But I'm always there, buying and discovering and listening and reading. Read about records. Know what records were made, not just in your era. What really upsets me about kids is they get locked in their era and their genre, and whatever's been shoved down their throats and their friends like and all that stuff, they go with. It's the easiest thing, you know? But some kids aren't like that. Like my daughter, she seeks and finds. And she's ended up knowing a lot more about some music than I do, you know what I mean? Because she seeks and she can find it on the internet. And she was a DJ at the radio station in college, and she's unique though, you know. She had John Sinclair write our letter of recommendation for a gig at the radio station in Thibodeau. It was like overkill, but it's pretty amazing. There are kids that really, because the information's there to find. Like for us, we'd have to go to record stores, dig through the bins, old record stores. We didn't have the internet. We just had books. Books, find things, read, you know what I mean? You couldn't even look books up on the internet. Man, the internet is like, you can find whatever you want, get it, you know. God, it's right there. Everything is right there.
Is this music right there that you're talking about?
Yeah, it's all there on YouTube. It's all free. Just look at it. It's all there. So much is there. Like I just discovered the Five Royals. I didn't know about the Five Royals. You know about the Five Royals? Five Royals happened. They were like the first black R&B group that sang together, and the guitar player was a bluesy dude, and he wrote all the songs. They were from like up around Chicago or somewhere. They wrote, the biggest one was, dedicated to the one I love from the Mamas and the Papas. And the Shirelles, they got it from the Shirelles. But before them, it was the Five Royals. They were just so good. They sang gospel, soul, they played blues licks. It was like, this music was so good. There's so much music out there that you don't even know exists. Every day I discover a 45 or something that has this freaky little thing in it. It's just so, that's what I draw from. I draw from what has already been. Amazing that someone would make that in a makeshift studio but all those old, see, I don't use Pro Tools, only to edit Pro Tools. I use old mixing boards I'm looking for the old sound. Very rarely I'll hear a new record. If it is, it's somebody trying to, excuse me. I'm looking for an old sound, like some kind of freaky blues. Yeah, a little, yeah.
There's, actually, I'll go over there. Just keep them on.
So that blues sound, I don't chase hits. In fact, if it's a hit, that's like I don't know. Like, especially a hit now. Like a hit from when I was a kid, maybe, I can remember it, I can get into it a little bit. Some weird AM hits from when I was a kid, they kind of light, make me think of a time or something. But current music, right now, I listen to some artists, but not too many mainstream. The last mainstream artist I listened to, Alabama Shakes. I thought they were pretty good. They are pretty good. I have a friend that made their record in Nashville. He's the, oh, thank you so much.
It's lemon in there.
Oh, cool. Back to music, like every kid's got a studio now. And there's this kid's got, and now they buy mixers. They're getting to the analog thing too, like me. I have kids that are kind of in my mindset, So it's getting to be kind of fun because the kids are understanding what I do a little bit more. It's getting rootsier.
Is there a sort of melding or shaping of music between the analog and the digital that
Yeah.
you're seeing happen?
Totally. In fact, even mainstream, like the White Stripes guy's got an 8-track, 1-inch, and a mixer up at his studio in Nashville. It's the big hippest thing, 1-inch 8s. I got a 1-inch 8-track from Malaco. Someone gave me. I don't use the tape, but I use the preamps. It cut Mr. Big Stuff and all kinds of old soul records. And I got an old mixer, keeping this working and stuff. So there's a fine line between both. Like I have Pro Tools. I don't want to use Pro Tools. I would rather dump it, go bring it to my buddy who's really good, uses it every day, because I use it for cutting and pasting. Like, I'll listen to my multi-track and there'll be little things I want to move and clean up and stuff. That's what I'll do. I'll get it ready, but I'm not mixing what we call mixing in the box. That's in the computer. A lot of people like that and they're good at it. I don't like it. I'm a mixer guy, so I want to mix through the mixer. Even though if it's a digital signal, I have a digital multi-track, but if I go to Pro Tools, I'll go just to clean up, edit, comp things, double things, whatever. I can do all that work and then put it back on my hard drive and I'm gonna mix it through the board. And like things like if I've got something I gotta mute, I'll just take it out there where I don't have to worry about muting it later. I do that kind of stuff. Or if I have a great background vocal on 2 sections, but the third one's bad, I'll just copy and paste that one there. You see, that kind of stuff. Rather than torture myself and tracking. Because an artist, when you burnt them out, when you got them and you got as much as you're going to get out of them and then get out of here, next. Because, a lot of these new artists, kids, well, can I do 3 passes and we comp? No, not in this studio. You do a whole pass, maybe I'll punch you in one spot, if I really, you know what I mean? But these guys are like, oh, let me comp. No, we're not comping. We're not on a screen right now. I don't want to be on a screen yet. I'm going to go on a screen by myself and comp you, but I'm not good, because then they all want to be producers then. They want to comp all their vocals, So I'm kind of old school with capturing. And it doesn't have to be perfect with me. It doesn't have to be perfect tempo. It doesn't have to be perfectly in tune if it works, if I feel it.
So, we probably should get wrapping up here, but what, if anything, do you want to say about yourself, about New Orleans, to people who might not come here, have never been here? Is there anything you want to say?
New Orleans is like an island in America. Like a third world island in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of cool stuff here. There's a lot of culture here. It's a part of me. And I definitely have a love-hate relationship with it because it can be an obstinate town for artists. It can accept artists not from here a lot easier than artists that are from here. As I get older, it's a lot easier to accept all these things and realize that that's how life is, like Jesus in your hometown kind of business. There's a total scene going on here right now. If you go up and down St. Claude, up and down Frenchman Street, up in the Bywater, I've never seen the city as vibrant, mostly from people not from here, which is good because our audiences are kind of dull, if you ask me. We're good at home and they have parties and all that stuff, but for venues, my experience when I play, the most enthusiastic crowds are the foreign people who come. Like if I'll play on Frenchman Street at the Three Muses, there'll be someone from England, someone from Chicago, someone from Memphis, someone all over. And those are the best gigs for me when I can hold court. It doesn't have to be a big place, and the food's good. So if y'all ever want a cool little spot, the Three Muses on Frenchman. Good tapas, and it's not loud, it's very cabaret-ish. But what I like about, there's only 3 or 4 of these kind of places, is that you can hold court there and give them something and they're listening. Most of the other places, like DBA, which was a great gig, DBA is great because you have to make them dance. That's a dance thing there. You know, they will dance. So you there, if you can make them dance, that's cool. And that's usually the thing, dancing and drinking, you see. But pretty much, this is like the city that care forgot, let the good times roll. Bob Dylan's not going to be discovered on Frenchman Street. You know what I mean? It's something that's not going to be discovered here. Although maybe the people who move here might see it as something, but this is a le bon temps roulé. Let the good times roll. Dance music, happy, blues. So from that point of view, this is a very food, alcohol city. That's what we do. We play music so people will eat and dance. And maybe search for men or women, you know, like a little mating ritual kind of thing goes on here, like Mardi Gras, all that. Yeah, people, that's sort of like and in a way, that's what music was always kind of for, really. A little mating ritual, kind of get us together, dance, drink a little bit. I mean, Dylan and people were cool. I mean, I'm a big Dylan fan, you know, but it's not the kind of music that's really from here, you know. Although Alan Toussaint may have touched on it a little bit from his perspective with his ways about lyrics. I wouldn't say that Dylan didn't influence Alan Toussaint when he heard him, but it was a whole nother thing, you know. That being said, I'm glad to be here, 61. I'm more excited about playing music than recording, but I love to record music lately, and especially with someone who is dying for me to record them. I'm not in the business of begging people to make them famous anymore because it's just boring to me. But I'm into creating in my studio songs, new songs, and new sounds, and new people that I can play, enjoy, and get in the zone with. And that's what it's about. Being in the zone when everything is synced. Like the other night at the DBA, we were jamming. It was rock, and you know when you're in the zone. It's like the sweet spot. So we all live this for the sweet spot. Our whole life we live to be in that sweet spot. And that sweet spot could be in the studio when we hear that track, or at that gig, or when we get the Buscadero article with 6 pages in Italy. Think maybe we'll get a gig in Italy, and they'll feed us good, you know. And and the best part about it is people will enjoy it and dance, and they'll like it. I'll leave on this. I got only gig. One of my paying gigs that I don't want to do anymore is on the West Bank, and it's at a sports bar, Catoosa's. And I go there because I have a lot of family and friends that will come. But I am bored with it because they won't turn the TVs off. They don't really like music there, you know, and I'm pushing it to do anything creative. They like cover bands. They will turn on droves for a cover band from there. But so, you know, and they pay $100 a man, and I am not playing there anymore. And Lord knows that's a good gig, a $100 gig, you know. Some people think $200 is a good, you know. But, so that's what I'll leave you on, the sweet spot.